Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of popular culture. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another episode in my ongoing efforts to drive myself mad by watching endless mockbusters made by the Asylum, often considered the worst movie studio on the planet. This episode, the Asylum takes on Marvel and once again leans into things being in the public domain. Can't copyright the gods, though I feel like L. Ron Hubbard might have given it the old college try. I've gone on record as saying I'm not a big superhero guy, though I am a big comics guy, and I like a lot of stuff that is definitely superhero adjacent. One of my favourite comics of recent years is Kieran Gillen and Caspar Wingard's The Power Fantasy, which is very much about beings with superpowers, but also a massive allegory where superhumans are like nuclear weapons. If they fight, everyone dies. It's an incredibly dense and layered story and well worth checking out. My issue with superhero comics is a little bit about the costumes and the code names, but mostly about how lengthy, ongoing comics are unable to tell stories with genuine consequences, because ultimately the status quo must always re-establish itself. Every time there's actual consequences, they will sooner or later be undone with a reboot or another character taking on the mantle of the hero and returning it to something depressingly familiar. This leaks into cinema as well. We've had so many Batmen by this point. There's been plenty of solidly enjoyable films along the way, but I feel like we've had enough Batmen. Do we really need another one? No. But we're getting at least two, with Robert Pattinson donning the cape again for Batman 2 at the end of the year, and James Gunn's new DC Cinematic Universe set to have its own Caped Crusader. Until morale improves, the Batmen will continue. And I'm not opposed to superhero stuff. I saw James Gunn's Superman and very much enjoyed it, and I'm genuinely quite fond of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's run on Fantastic Four. But by and large, I tend to prefer the weirder end of mainstream superhero comics, and Thor definitely feels like it's coming from the weird end. There's a run on Thor where they more or less do Wagner's Ring Cycle, which is an amazingly bold thing to do in a comic aimed at kids. There's also a bunch of cosmic level stuff in there, which has Thor running around dealing with threats on a more appropriately godly level, which I also quite enjoyed. On the other hand, What If the God of Thunder Solved Crimes but with a Hammer is an endearing premise, and was also something that worked well with the ambient level of silliness and magical weirdness that was common in the Silver Age. The Thor movies have been a mixed bag at best, although Chris Hemsworth's performance has been a consistent high point. Thor seems to work fairly well as a member of the Avengers, what with all the cosmic level threats they face, but his solo outings have been more miss than hit. I thought the first one was fine, and that's the one we're concerned with here. It's easy to forget now their household names, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe was built on the back of characters who were very much second tier, since Marvel had to sell the rights to all their A-listers when they had a little bankruptcy issue. Marvel's best-selling characters, Spider-Man and the X-Men, were firmly off the table, so it was Iron Man and Thor who would define the MCU in its earliest years. There was also an Incredible Hulk movie with Ed Norton, but Hulk wouldn't get his defining MCU incarnation until the Avengers. If Iron Man was a risk, then I think Thor was an even bigger one, but it's one that certainly paid off. It's an interesting one for the Asylum to tackle, in that the Norse mythology that underpins the Thor comics is definitely in the public domain. At the same time, the Thor comics exist to give a series of pointers about what kind of stories an audience might expect from a film riding on the coattails of the comics adaptation. Thor as a comic book hero is interesting in that there's a bunch of stories that take place broadly in the real world, but also a bunch of stories that take place in Asgard and other fantastical locations. Audiences will be expecting to see Thor doing godly stuff, but at the same time they will be expecting him to interact with the real world at some stage. Whilst the Asylum are not a studio especially beholden to audience expectations, they do generally try to create movies that exist in the same conceptual space as the source material, and that tends to be more the case with something like Thor, which is a known quantity even outside of the movie they're ripping off. How does this iteration of the God of Thunder land? Well, let's take a look at the plot. This is an almost impossible film to usefully summarise, but thankfully the overall plot structure is very simple, so we'll start with that and then drill down into some of the details that make this so very special. You have a broad 3-act structure. The first act takes place in Asgard, where Loki is trying to bring about the end of the world. He raises an army of giant lizard dogs and sets out to conquer Valhalla so he can steal the Hammer of Invincibility and use it to trigger Ragnarok. Thor, his brother Baldir, and his dad Kevin Nash are trying to oppose Loki's schemes, but sadly prove unequal to the task, and Baldir and Kevin Nash fall in battle, leaving only the callow younger brother Thor to try and oppose Loki. Fortunately, before he expires, Kevin Nash manages to chuck the Hammer of Invincibility through a portal and put it somewhere safe. Loki fights Thor and kicks his ass in order to force him to reveal the location of the hammer, but Thor is saved by a Valkyrie named Jan Saxa, who leads him to the safe place where Loki's magic cannot penetrate. Thor wants to fight Loki again, and Jan Saxa kicks his ass to demonstrate that he's really not ready to fight Loki. They run away to Midgard, aka the second act. In Midgard, the real world, Thor wants to fight Loki, but Jan Saxa thinks he needs more training, and also a Glock 9mm and an Uzi. He has all these things in a safe house, and they can also make a portal to where the Hammer of Invincibility is hidden, which is in the Tree of Life. Loki comes to Midgard and strides about smirking, while people who are visibly not part of the film crew look gently baffled. He uses magic to track Thor and Jan Saxa. Thor goes to the Tree of Life, which involves a fight with a man in armour that is entirely done in slow motion. Thor wins, which is the first fight we've ever seen him win, and goes to take the hammer from the Tree of Life, which is some leaves dangling from a soundstage under a green light. The Hammer of Invincibility looks like a loaf of sliced bread that's been sellotaped to the top of a walking stick. Back in Midgard with the carb-heavy hammer, we settle into a pattern for a little bit. Thor will insist that he's ready to fight Loki, Jan Saxa will point out that he's very bad at fighting, and then Loki will kick his ass through a mixture of fighting and magical misdirection. Thor grows increasingly frustrated, and Jan Saxa somehow refrains from beating him to death. Finally, it seems like Thor has bested Loki and steals his magic bone. Everyone loves a magic bone. Loki begs for the bone back and says he will use it to bring Kevin Nash back from the dead, and then he seems to melt. Thor takes the magic bone back to their base, but Jan Saxa makes him promise that he won't use it to try and bring Kevin Nash back from the dead. She leaves to check that Loki, the Master of Illusions, is really dead. The absolute second that she's gone, Thor uses the magic bone to try and bring Kevin Nash back from the dead. It summons Loki instead. What a surprise. By bringing the magic bone inside their base, Loki was able to bypass the wards. Jan Saxa shows up and saves Thor yet again. Once they've escaped, Jan Saxa has a cunning plan. They should hide the Hammer of Invincibility, like Kevin Nash did, which seemed to be working until Thor went and grabbed it. Thor has a different plan. I wonder if you can guess what it is. He's going to fight Loki again, but this time he definitely won't get his ass kicked. Thor and Jan Saxa fight both Loki and a rubbish dragon monster he's summoned. In the single best moment of the film, Thor runs at Loki with a rubbish hammer in one hand and an Uzi in the other. It doesn't stop him getting his ass kicked, of course, and Thor and Jan Saxa flee yet again, but Jan Saxa is too slow and gets captured by Loki. Thor goes in search of Jan Saxa and thinks he's found her dying. Turns out it was just an illusion though, and as they share a tender embrace, she turns into Loki and Loki nicks the hammer. Loki starts kicking off Ragnarok, summoning loads of dragon monsters to go with his giant lizard dogs and smashing the world up with the Hammer of Invincibility while yelling Ragnarok over and over again. He opens a portal to Muspelheim, the land of fire, and kicks Jan Saxa and Thor through it to die in the lava. Jan Saxa seems to die, although off-screen, presumably because they couldn't be bothered doing a even rubbish CGI being on fire death. But she's able to give Thor a post-mortem pep talk, and Thor is so annoyed by how badly his day is going that he makes his own hammer by picking up lava and punching it until it turns into a hammer. which was more or less my approach to pottery the one time I tried it. Unlike me though, it seems to work for Thor, and he makes a special hammer, which looks like a loaf of sliced bread that's been sellotaped to a walking stick, but also covered with baking foil. Loki is going ham on the Ragnarok in scenes of destruction that are genuinely mildly impressive. He's also destroying the Tree of Life, and the end of the world seems very much on the cards. They fight one last time, and Thor smashes the badly named Hammer of Invincibility with his special tinfoil hammer, and then smashes Loki with the tinfoil hammer, and this time it seems to finally take. Thor repairs the Tree of Life, returns to Asgard, and in a nice little coda, visits the Norns and smashes their spinning wheel so that the fate of the world is in the hands of those who live in it. The end. Within this fairly simple structure, there's so much that I could have talked about, but if I mention everything that occurred to me in the viewing of this cinematic masterpiece, I think the summary of the film would have ended up longer than the runtime of the actual movie. There's something that sparks joy in me in almost every moment of this film. I'm going to have to be harsh with myself and only talk about the ones that really made an impact. If there's a central thesis here, it's that I really like the Asylum films where they actually try to make the film you're expecting, even though there's not enough money to do that at all. The actual best Asylum films are probably the ones that stick to doing what's possible on a shoestring budget. Battle for Pandora is a fairly solid science fiction horror movie by virtue of doing something on a very small scale. Their slashers and slasher-adjacent films have been broadly passable. What's most interesting to me is when they throw caution to the wind and try and make the film that the poster is claiming you're going to be watching. It seems more honest somehow. Titanic 2 is probably the best example of that so far, in that they tried to do a maritime disaster movie without access to a boat or any large bodies of water. This is pretty much on that level as they try and do an epic fantasy action movie without any of the things that such a project might require. It swings for the fences and absolutely misses by such an enormous margin that you have to stand up and applaud whichever lunatic thought it was even a good idea to try. It's a car crash, but it's a very memorable car crash, and I had such a good time with it. First of all, there's Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is nearly 7 foot tall and has lovely long white hair and a beard. He is physically ideal for playing Odin, and he also has bags of charisma. It's just completely the wrong kind of charisma for Odin. Kevin Nash has a natural easygoing charm that's unusual in such a physically intimidating man, but which is less than ideal for the King of the Aesir. Like many of the best bits of Asylum casting, he's delightfully ill-suited to the role, but at the same time intensely watchable. He takes the inevitable early bath, since they can't shoot all of his scenes on one set like usual, but he's still an absolute highlight. There's even a scene where he runs, and any wrestling fan will tell you that if Kevin Nash breaks into a run and part of his leg doesn't snap or fall off, you've witnessed something truly amazing. Kevin Nash running qualifies as a stunt. The first act is essentially a big battle scene as Loki summons an army of giant lizard dogs to attack the castle of Valhalla, and at this point the cast consists of Thor, Baldir, Kevin Nash, Loki, one random Aesir guy, and precisely 2 extras. That is not a lot of people to turn into a pitched battle in front of a castle. Also, they don't really have a castle, and the entire thing needs to be shot in some woods. Can you convey an entire battle by superimposing some flames on a digital map painting of a castle and some tiny and crudely rendered warriors arrayed in battle lines before it? No, but also, somehow, yes. There's a glorious moment where 2 extras with bows fire arrows up into the sky, and we cut to a gigantic cloud of CGI arrows flying up into the air. The suggestion is that these 2 fellas with bows are part of a mighty horde of Aesir, and I think we're supposed to understand that Loki has an army of his own that they're shooting at, but apparently the bad guys don't even rate a couple of extras to act as Loki's minions, so they just have to be implied by Loki sometimes shouting at people who transparently don't exist. I mean, it's wonderful. The sheer brass neck of it all. What Loki does have is somewhere around 3 giant lizard dogs and a magic bone that shoots fireballs. The lizard dogs are Asylum CGI, but not that bad, considering. They look quite cool, they look very evil, and they move with something approximating realism. They're even on screen for long enough that you can generally work out what they're doing. Also, whenever the good guys are fighting them, they're just waving their swords in the air at random, and it looks like they're doing semaphore or some kind of interpretive dance. I absolutely love it when the Asylum tries to do something that clearly requires at least 100 people with access to 5. You can cover a lot with CGI, even the rubbish CGI that the Asylum uses, but you genuinely can't make 6 actual people seem like 100 actual people. One of the extras also doesn't know how to hold a sword. Did you know you can hold a sword badly? Apparently you can. The secret is to hold it exactly parallel with your body so that you look like a He-Man figure. There's a bunch of natural ways to hold a sword, and this extra has hit on the only one that looks stiff and awkward. The gulf between the scale of action they're aiming for and the scale of action they can afford is especially apparent when the cast heads to Earth for the middle section of the movie. When Thor and Jarl Saxa pop out of the portal, Thor looks in bewilderment at the enormous buildings around him. We see drone shots of gleaming skyscrapers, sleek edifices forged from steel and glass into geometric obelisks of dizzying sophistication. This is the overwhelming experience of late-stage capitalism in all its decadent glory, the wonders of engineering a challenge to the gods themselves. Then Thor and Jarl Saxa start walking, and you realise that they're actually in a car park on a down-at-heel industrial estate. There's rusting chain-link fences and spools of razor wire everywhere, and the weather seems to have got 70% more overcast and depressing than in the stock footage of buildings. The grimy industrial estate is where all the actual action of the middle third of the movie will take place. There's a weird but accidental parallel with the Thor movie it's ripping off here. By curious coincidence, much of that film takes place in New Mexico, kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's a decent number of fights in this film, and if Superman made people believe that a man can fly, then Almighty Thor will make you believe that 2 men can cautiously circle each other while holding swords and sometimes clashing them together. It's probably more representative of an actual sword fight, but at the same time, it's not exactly cinematic. However, they do last more than a couple of seconds and you can see what's going on, so while the fights are underwhelming from a superhero perspective, they do at least successfully convey what's going on. Towards the end, when the magical hammers come out, we do get a few efforts to do something a bit more over the top. This mostly involves the sonic booms from the impacts breaking windows in the nearby area, which is fine once but quickly gets old. With a smaller cast than is often the case for Asylum films, there's lots of pressure on the actors and script to keep things ticking over between the various action sequences. Richard Grieco as Loki is very much the highlight here. He portrays the trickster god with an oily malice that I very much enjoyed, giving him a predatory smirk that looks quite lizard-like. He's hamming it up a treat and leaning into Loki's habit of making illusions and telling lies to give us a villain with a total absence of redeeming features, and I always enjoy that. He's got that mix of vanity, cowardice, sadism and mendacity that you normally only see on GB News. He is such an easy character to root against. The heroes are less good. This is ultimately supposed to be the story of a younger brother discovering himself and learning to be the best version of himself to face down an awesome challenge. The script wants us to see Thor on a journey from hot-headed, impetuous youth to becoming the actual god of thunder. Unfortunately, neither the script nor the actor are really up to the challenge. Thor comes off like an infant who hasn't developed object permanence as he responds to being repeatedly beaten up by throwing tantrums and claiming that it's all going to be fine this time, he promises. Cody Deal, who plays Thor, gives him a certain emotional vulnerability, but at the cost of making him come off like a toddler trapped in a reasonably buff man's body. It's faintly endearing seeing him insist for the 5th time that he's going to beat up Loki for sure, and it definitely won't end up with him getting his ass kicked yet again. He's got the look and vibe of a pro wrestling jobber who has to insist in his pre-match promo that he's going to win the title on Saturday, even though he's not won a match in 5 years. This toddler vibe has the unfortunate side effect of making Jan Saxer, in theory his love interest, into his actual carer. Whether she's gently kicking his ass to demonstrate he's still incredibly bad at fighting, encouraging him to get into a portal, or trying to get him to remember that he's completely failed to fight Loki every time he's tried, she comes off more like a supremely patient mum than anything else. Actress Patricia Velasquez is doing her best, but the script is giving her very little to do, and hasn't worked out that in order for her devotion to Thor to land, he needs to have somehow earned that devotion. The dominant emotion he seems to evoke is a kind of exasperated forbearance, more like how you'd feel about a naughty kitten than the titular god of thunder. Overall, though, I have to say I definitely enjoyed Almighty Thor. It's clearly a very bad movie by any sane standard, but there is a lot here to enjoy for connoisseurs of the Asylum's output. The fact that it tried to do a major battle with only 6 people and then located Ragnarok entirely in a car park is enough to push this into so bad it's awesome territory. It's more or less impossible to make the film it wants to be on the budget available, but that hasn't stopped it from trying, and that's always more entertaining than the alternative. I also appreciate that even though the effects are objectively terrible, the film isn't embarrassed by them like King of the Lost World was. They're fully visible. It's clear what they're about, and you either suspend your disbelief or you don't. It's the second one, obviously, but I appreciate the effort. If there's a single phrase to sum up my feelings about Almighty Thor, it's that I found it oddly charming. It's a car crash on any sane level, but there's a weirdly sincere heart to it. It's got themes, even if they're badly explored, and Thor himself somehow ends up being a synecdoche for the entire film as a whole. It's a film that doesn't know and refuses to accept that it's rubbish, and I admire that. Before we finish, I need to make an announcement about the format of this podcast. I'm dropping the episodes from 4 a month to 2, starting from the next episode. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I want to gently tweak back the curtain of how my creative process works to explain why I think it's necessary. When I restarted Popular Antiquarian, I envisaged it as being a weekly 10 to 15 minute episode. Something short and sweet, because I honestly didn't think there would be that much material in an Asylum film. As I've delved into their output, I've found the episodes generally running to at least twice that, and the difference between writing 4 10-minute episodes a month and 4 25-minute episodes a month is massive. I could write shorter episodes, of course, and stick to the weekly schedule, but as the project has developed, I realised that, for me, the devil's very much in the detail with this kind of thing. I like subjecting these films to stupidly in-depth critique, and I just don't see that changing. Doing 4 episodes of the podcast a month just isn't feasible on top of fantastic fights and my other, admittedly small commitments. I also need to look after my mental health, which is the reason I fill my time with making podcasts rather than having a proper job. So the next episode will be in 2 weeks. I hope that's not too much of a disappointment. We're trying something new for the next episode, as I've thrown the choice of movie open to a popular vote over on my Patreon, and my kind patrons have selected A Princess of Mars, an adaptation of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars stories that came out several years ahead of Disney's ill-fated John Carter. I hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, you can get in touch with me by emailing hjdoomretrofun, all one word, at gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky. If you are enjoying this podcast, why not tell a friend? If you aren't, why not tell an enemy? Thanks very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.